Now I want to read you a story. All right, so let me give you a little background to this story. This story popped into my head in one chunk, like complete, which I thought was kind of interesting, but it was also a story that emerged in solution to a problem I'd been thinking about for a long time, because I was dealing with this guy who didn't want to grow up. So he's caught in a kind of Peter Pan situation. And Peter Pan, Pan means everything, eh? Pan, like pantheistic. And Peter Pan is a child who won't grow up. Now he's magical. Well, okay, fine. Children live in a magical world, right? They're rife with possibility. He's magical. He doesn't want to grow up. So he lives in Neverland with the Lost Boys. Neverland doesn't really exist, and the Lost Boys are obviously boys who haven't managed to establish some mode of being. And he's in constant battle with Captain Hook. And Captain Hook's a tyrant, right? A pirate, a manifestation of the negative archetype of social order. And Captain Hook is always fighting Peter Pan because Peter Pan represents childhood and vulnerability, and he doesn't want to be vulnerable, so they're locked in this sort of eternal battle. And lots of people, I think more commonly men, but not necessarily, get caught in this Peter Pan problem. So I was dealing with a person who was caught in this situation, didn't want to grow up, wouldn't sacrifice childhood. And so this story popped into my head. It's called Cock-a-doodle-doo. Once upon a time there was a man who had a long, hard journey ahead of him. He was trudging along the way over boulders and through brushes when he saw a little shiny gnome with big white teeth and a black toupee sitting by the side of the road. He was drumming on a log with two white bones and humming oddly to himself. The little gnome said, "John, why work so hard? Why walk so fast? Who knows if you'll ever get there anyway? Come over here, I have something to show you." So John walked off the road. He was sick of walking anyway because people kept throwing sticks and stones at him. The little gnome said, "I have a shiny red jewel that I would like to sell you. Cheap. Here it is." And from beneath his cloak he pulled the biggest ruby that the man had ever seen. It must have weighed 100 pounds, and it shone like the sun. The gnome said, "Do you like it?" "It's an enchanted stone. What will you offer me for it?" And the man said, "I don't have much money, but I'll give you everything I have." The gnome looked displeased. So John added, "I could pay some more monthly." So the gnome accepted. "Fair enough. Buy now, pay later." "Sounds good for me. I'm all for the installment plan." So the man gave the gnome all his money and promised to pay the rest later. And the gnome walked back into the bush by the road, clacking his teeth and giggling and twitching. The more the man thought about this ruby and the great deal he got, the happier he became. He started back on the road with a light heart, but soon discovered that he couldn't make much progress because 100 pounds was a lot to carry. He said to himself, "Why continue anyways? I have what I want. I'll just stand here holding my ruby, and when people walk by they can see how well I've already done." So he stopped. A little while later, one of his friends came along and saw him standing there. His friend said, "John, why don't you come along with me? I've just opened a new business and I could really use some help. Come along quick. It will be opening soon." John thought that sounded good, but his friend was in a hurry. Besides, couldn't he see the ruby? How could he speed along beside him? Where would he put his jewel? So he said, "Thanks, but I have to take care of my jewel. Maybe I'll see you later." His friend looked at him like he was crazy, but he was trying to get somewhere quick. So he just shrugged a bit and said, "Okay, John, see you later." Then he sped on down the road. A little while later, another friend came by and he said, "John, nice to see you. I'm going back to school. There are lots of wonderful things to learn, great things to do. The world is full of unsolved problems. I could use some company. Would you like to come along?" John thought that sounded pretty good, but this friend too looked like he was in a hurry. Besides, standing beside the road holding the jewel was tiring, and he needed all the energy he had for that. So he said to his friend, "Thanks, but I have to take care of my jewel. Isn't it beautiful? Maybe I'll see you later." His friend looked at him like he was crazy, but he was trying to get somewhere quick. So he just shrugged and said, "Hope everything goes all right with you. See you later." Many friends came and went, and the years went by. The jewel got heavier and heavier, but the man got more and more attached to it. The only thing was, nobody seemed to notice how beautiful it was. people would rush by and talk about their plans, and nobody had a ruby as big, and nobody seemed likely to get a ruby as big, and you'd think that someone might have had said something like, at least, "Nice ruby, John. Sure wish I had one like that." But it never happened. Then one day someone new came down the road. He was bent over and he was thin and his hair was gray, although he didn't look that old. He was carrying a big dirty rock carefully in his arms, and he wasn't making much progress. The strange figure approached and glanced up at John. Then he grinned and said, "Why are you standing there so stupidly with a big ugly rock in your tired old hands? You look pretty daft. I bet you wish you had a big ruby like the one I am carrying." And John thought, this poor man is deluded. He's carrying a rock. It is I who have the ruby. So he said, "Excuse me, sir, but you are sadly mistaken. I'm the one with the jewel. I met a little gnome by the side of the road, and he sold it to me. I'm still paying for it, although not so very much. You are carrying a rock." The tired stranger looked annoyed. He said, "I don't know what game you're playing, mister. You have a rock. I have a jewel. The little gnome you described sold it to me, and he said it was the only one. I've been carrying it for 20 years, and I'll never let it go." And John said, "But I've been carrying mine for 20 years too. It can't be just a rock. Rock or jewel?" On and on they argued. Suddenly out stepped the little gnome, as if he'd never left. Only this time he wasn't so little. He was bigger and redder and menacing, and his laugh sounded like the rattling of chains. "Quit arguing, you two. I've never seen a sight quite so pathetic. You're carrying rocks, both of you. And if you would have ever had the sense to put them down for a second or two, you would have seen that. Oh well, at least you were diligent. I played a mean trick. I feel bad. So I'm going to give you what you really deserve. Do you want what you really deserve?" And John and the thin stranger nodded eagerly. Finally, they thought. "You haven't seen anything yet. Throw down your rocks." So John and the thin stranger obeyed. Each rock split down the middle when it hit the ground. Out flowed a river of ravenous white worms, which rushed towards the men and devoured them whole, while they thrashed about and screamed. Soon nothing was left except a leg bone from each. The little gnome picked them up and walked off the road. He sat down by a hollow log and started to drum. He drummed and he waited, and he hummed an odd little tune. "A picture of food feeds the whole hungry clan. The image of good makes the whole healthy man. Why walk for miles? Why do the work? Just smile the smile. Success, after all, is a quirk. Life isn't real. That's the message I give. It's easy that way. Plus, who wants to live?" So needless to say, the guy that I was telling this story to never listened to it, and things really didn't go well for him for a long, long time. And they really didn't go well for him until he was willing to give up some of the things he was carrying along. So he had acquired, for example, a number of things that he couldn't afford. And the fact that he was carrying them, right, paying for them month after month, meant he couldn't afford to get an education, was perfectly willing to sacrifice the possibility of getting an education for the image of success rather than the reverse, right? And he was completely irritated at the world because he had all these trappings of success, which no one he admired also admired, and he absolutely wasn't getting anywhere. And he thought that was tremendously unfair. But the truth of the matter was that had he put down what he was carrying for even a moment, then he would have been able to get to where he wanted to go. And that's a motif that succinctly and dramatically describes the necessity for sacrifice.